Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, all of you. Thanks to all of you who have joined us for this, I think, very interesting conversation, which is about the recent developments in the Middle East. And definitely, when we speak about the Middle East, all those developments which relate to our friendly nation of the State of Israel is of particular interest to Georgia. We are long-time partners, and we are long-time friendly nations, and therefore the recent breakthrough in the Middle East, the stalemate, if I may to put it in this way, definitely of great interest to us. My name is Victor Kipiani. I'm the chair of Tbilisi-based think tank, Geocase. And I'm joined for this webinar by His Excellency, Ambassador of the State of Israel to Georgia, Mr. Gidor. And I'm also joined by my colleagues, Mr. Emil Avdaliani, who is a non-resident fellow for Geocase, and Mr. Vakhtang Charaia, who is the head of Tbilisi of the Center for Economic Analysis at Tbilisi State University. So thank you, gentlemen. Definitely, we, as I've said, that's the first case. That's the precedent, if you will, when we are to discuss those developments. And I'm pretty sure that what's happening on the front stage and what's happening at the backstage is clearly of a great interest to Georgian scholars, politicians, decision makers, and not just on the Georgian side, but in the region as such. The region of the South Caucasus, which is undergoing quite critical developments and quite dramatic developments. I should say that what we are witnessing in the Middle East these days, they clearly speak to the extent that old habits are about to be given up. The establishment of diplomatic ties between Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, they clearly signal a breakthrough, which are a clear reminder that the political landscape in the Middle East is changing, and those changes are hopefully and definitely they're taking sort of development in the right direction. We will not be able to cover all the issues within the 1 hour, but we'll try to give a good insight to what's happening on the ground within the next 1 hour. And that being said, and with my appreciation to His Excellency, Mr. Gidor, the floor is yours. If you could give your insight, if you give your impressions, I fully appreciate that those insight and those impressions would be given in your capacity, in your official capacity. But in any capacity, as a good friend of us, you are very welcome to share your most intimate thoughts. And please feel free to go ahead. So thank you very much indeed, for your time, and welcome to the audience, Mr. Gidor.
Thank you very much, Victor. It's a pleasure for me to take part in your webinar, and I appreciate the fact that you invited me to take part in this prestigious event. The breakthrough, as you put it, between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, of course, is a rare glimmer of good, positive news against the background of everything else that's been happening in the Middle East in recent times. And especially, the COVID-related news that are still featuring very high on the agenda for all of us. Now, what is unusual about the diplomatic rapprochement between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain is that the importance lies less in the substance and more in the packaging. Normally, it's the other way around. But of course, as wonderful, as welcome, as encouraging as these developments are, and only yesterday I was heartened to see images of my colleagues from the Israeli Foreign Ministry landing in Bahrain. We have to realize, and now we can talk about it openly, that Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE have had relations, de facto relations, for years and years now. Israel has had not an embassy, but what we call an interest office in the UAE for many years. It was operating quite openly, though, albeit not as a fully fledged embassy. And politicians from both sides used to travel to and from, and we have the full panoply of relations, political, commercial, and others. Now, all of that has been under the surface, but whoever was really interested could easily find out more information about it. Now it's on the surface. And why is that important? It's not just about diplomatic etiquette and changing the official status of our office in the UAE from interest office to embassy. It's about the architecture in the Middle East. Now, there are 5 reasons why this development is significant. First of all, as I said, it's about the visibility. We no longer need to conduct our relationship, bilateral relations with the UAE and Bahrain in the dark, as if we're doing something that is a complete taboo and we're afraid of what the public opinion in the Middle East would think about it. No, now it's legitimate, it's overboard, and basically the message is, you know, if you don't like it, you have to deal with it. And there are still enough forces in the Middle East who dislike it, and I'll touch on that later. So the visibility element is crucial in the Middle East because it's all about winning hearts and minds and moving public opinions in much of the Arab world from a traditional position of being antagonistic towards Israel to considering Israel as a potential partner, a friend, an ally. We have to remember that there are also practical considerations for this. The UAE is a candidate for a temporary seat in the Security Council and next year, 2021. And by openly recognizing Israel and establishing diplomatic relations with Israel, the UAE is signaling that it's a cosmopolitan global diplomatic force to be reckoned with, not just a regional player. The second reason why it's important is, of course, the big elephant in the room. And the biggest elephant in the Middle East is Iran, of course. It's not a secret that in recent years, you can see clearly 2 axes forming in the Middle East. On the one hand, you have Iran and its cronies, Syria, for example, Iraq to a certain extent, the Houthis in Yemen, the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon. On the other hand, on the other side, you've got, of course, Israel, and then you've got the moderates. You've got Egypt, you've got to a certain extent Jordan, and you've got Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and others. Now, this is what happened now, this diplomatic breakthrough between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain is a considerable blow to Iranian diplomatic efforts to establish a hegemony in the Middle East. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has been a major client of US arms in recent years, and it's already become quite evident that they're likely to purchase the most advanced, cutting-edge American jets, military jets, the F-35s. That so far Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has purchased the F-35s, and Bahrain, of course, is a base for the U.S. Fifth Navy. So we're talking about major players here, major actors that have affiliated themselves with the West for years and years, and now by establishing open diplomatic relations with Israel, they are firmly planting the flag in the ground. Namely, we belong to a certain camp with certain values and certain policies, and Iran is not a member of our camp. Thirdly, the third significance is the implication in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So until relatively recently, the axiomatic assumption was that it's impossible to achieve any kind of progress between Israel and the Arab world pending a resolution of the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And no Arab country would be prepared to betray, quote unquote, the Palestinian cause by establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. Well, of course, the first country which did that is the major Arab country, Egypt, in 1979. That was followed by Jordan in 1995, and indeed the Palestinians themselves negotiated with us the famous Oslo Peace Accords in 1993. But since then, unfortunately, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process has been in tatters, and everyone assumed that that would stultify any prospects for progress between Israel and the rest of the Arab world. Where what happened now suggests that it is possible. And even though both Bahrain and the UAE are still rhetorically loyal, faithful to the Palestinian cause, they're saying effectively, we can serve the Palestinian interest better by talking to Israel openly, rather than by sidelining or ignoring Israel. If you want us to be effective mediators between Israel and Israel, then we need to talk to the Israelis openly overboard. So the equation, with no peace process between Israel and Palestine equals no peace process between Israel and the rest of the Arab world, that equation has been laid to rest. We also have to remember that here there's also a certain nuance, which is very interesting. The arch rival to President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority is Mohammed Dakhlan. He used to be a member of the Fatah government of the Palestinian Authority, but in the past decade, he's moved outside of the Palestinian territory, and he's based in Abu Dhabi. And Mohammed Dakhlan considers himself the heir to the Palestinian throne, so to speak. So the fact that the UAE is now acknowledging Israel publicly probably has a lot to do with the fact that they provided shelter to Mohammed Dakhlan, who is the main opposition person to President Abbas. Then the other big elephant in the room, so to speak, metaphorically, is Turkey, of course. Now, Turkey moved very, very rapidly from a policy of zero conflict with any of its neighbors about a decade ago to maximum conflicts with maximum regional actors. So Turkey, of course, has fallen out with the US over Syria, over the purchase of Russian anti-aircraft missile batteries, despite the fact that that Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey has fallen out with the EU over migration policy, over the attempt to drill to find oil and gas in the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, and Turkey has fallen out with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, and with other moderate actors in the Middle East. Turkey in recent years is an open supporter, open ally, open sponsor of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. The Muslim Brotherhood movement is considered the arch major threat to political, religious, and ethnic stability in most of the Sunni Arab world. Now, both the UAE and Bahrain consider Turkey to be almost as malignant an actor as Iran. And by reaching out to Israel, once again, they're taking sides. Not that Israel is an enemy of Turkey, not at all. Israel and Turkey have very rich bilateral relations, despite what's going on the rhetorical level between President Erdogan and our government. But commercially, touristically, in civil society, we still have very strong relations with Turkey. Unfortunately, more often than not, we find ourselves in the opposing sides of the political divide, and we hope that this will change in the future. But for now, we do not consider Turkey to be on the same, shall we say, camp as us on most issues. Then. Finally, the last reason why this development is significant is because it radiates on all the other issues that feature nowadays on the map of the Middle East. We have the ongoing civil war, the ongoing tragedy in Yemen, where the UAE until recently was a major actor fighting against the Iranian-supported Houthis. We have the situation in Syria. We have the situation in Libya, where, again, the UAE is a major actor. We have the Horn of Africa, which is a critically strategic part of the world. and the UAE has been building both aerial and naval bases in the Horn of Africa. So the UAE has become more than just a princedom in the Persian Gulf. The UAE has ambitions to become a global player. And nowadays, if you're a Middle Eastern state and you have ambitions to become a global player, you can no longer ignore Israel, because Israel is like it or not, the most significant country, a non-Arab country in the Middle East. Then in terms of Iran, one last line before I end my presentation. We have to always keep a watchful eye on what's happening in Iran. And in the past couple of months, twice, Iran officially and formally announced a further erosion of its commitments to the international community. Now, this is not Israeli propaganda. I'm not reading my talking notes from Jerusalem. These are official letters sent by the Iranian regime to the IAEA in Vienna, announcing, for example, that the first letter on the 20th of July announced that they were going to transfer 3 cascades of centrifuges in the Natanz enrichment facility from the overground pilot facility to the underground facility. Now, why is that significant? Significant, first of all, because the underground facility is obviously much more difficult to neutralize if should any other country ever wish to do so. It's well protected, it's dug in, it's fortified. And secondly, it's a blatant violation of Security Council Resolution 2231. So what do we mean by 3 cascades? One cascade has 164 centrifuges of the IR4 type variety, which is considered very advanced. A second cascade has another 164 centrifuges of the IR2M variety. And the third one has 135 centrifuges of the IR6 variety, which is the most advanced of them all. Now, the agreement between Iran and the international community allowed Iran to use advanced centrifuges only overground in a pilot facility for R&D, research and development. By moving them underground, they're actually signaling to the international community that they're going to start using those hundreds of centrifuges, not for research and development, but for enrichment of fissile material in the process of creating a nuclear bomb. Now, of course, this is something that the international community cannot accept, lying down. The UAE and Bahrain, and of course Israel, are anxious to use every tool in our diplomatic arsenal in order to prevent Iran, which is probably the most extremist regime on the planet, from acquiring a weapon of mass destruction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much indeed. I really wrote down very interesting points, which I, frankly speaking, never came across when reading around the topic, and the points which have made been very much helpful. I very much liked your the sort of qualification of the radiating effects and what's happening really on the ground in the Middle East. It's not just about the locality of the Middle East, but it's about the broad effect of radiating within the region and beyond the region. So that being said, that radiating effect, which clearly shows a clear example, how the impasse should be broken down, and that's critical. That's very important, for our own problems on the Georgian side. With that on mind, with the radiating effects, I will pass the floor to my colleague at Geocase, Mr. Emil Avdaliani. Mr. Avdaliani, who writes very extensively on the region, or covers the Georgian matters and regional matters, not just in the local media, but through various regional outlets. He is a famous name in Georgian academia and among political pundits and scholars. So, Emil, I'm very glad that you joined us for this conversation. And please give us your thoughts, please, from your analysis and from your impressions on what's happening in Israel, around Israel, and in the broader context. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this introduction and very interesting words from the ambassador too, of course. And I would like to point out some, I would say, to put this diplomatic breakthrough more in the not even in the regional context per se, but in a way we could even see this within a global context too, because I believe that since we have this great recalibration of the US policy in the Middle East, particularly from the Middle East to Indo-Pacific region, this idea of relative, I would say, well, as very many, of course, argue that the US is not that active anymore in the region because of its interests, more because of its focusing on China and elsewhere. This, I think, this diplomatic breakthrough once again shows how fundamental, how instrumental is, I would say, the US diplomacy is for the region overall. And this, of course, was a blow to other major players in the region. And I would, of course, touch upon first, of course, a bit the US itself, then, of course, Russia and Iran too. But the US role, of course, should be emphasized in that. And I also believe that since we've got this idea of the US moving a bit further to the east, to the Indo-Pacific region, its role in the region, in the Middle East, should be, I would say, recalibrated in a way that not very many pundits for the moment, of course, understand how this will develop over the next decade, or even longer than that. But I believe that the US, through this diplomatic breakthrough, tried to show that it is central to the region, its diplomacy central to the region. It also showed that without the US, the peace in the Middle East is a very, very, I would say, not that possible, and not a stable region, of course, will be without Washington's active diplomatic approaches and generally engagement. But it also showed that how other regional players, or who, of course, show themselves as active regional players, are not actually that strong enough to be also diplomatically active beyond their military capabilities. And in that sense, of course, I would like to draw your attention on Russia's active, I would say, involvement in the Middle East, and its reaction to the Israeli, UAE and Bahrain diplomatic breakthrough. And if you look at the Russian media sources, I mean, their reaction was actually quite interesting. They were not particularly happy about the diplomatic breakthrough because they saw how limited their successful engagement in the Middle East actually is, because the Russian understanding of the Middle East and of their presence in the Middle East, particularly since the Syrian conflict, or I would say since their entrance into the Syrian conflict in 2015, was that Russia should also be very active diplomatically. And on that point, I think that the diplomatic breakthrough between Israel and the Muslim states, and the two Muslim states, is I mean, not to exaggerate as a defeat for the Russian diplomacy, but certainly it shows the limit to other players' capabilities, diplomatic possibilities in the diplomatic strength in the region, even though they are very actively engaged militarily. Russia in Syria and Iran in several countries at the same time. I would also like to draw your attention to Iran's position. Well, Mr. Ambassador talked a lot about Iran, and I would also just add some of the points on that front. That, I mean, for Iran, it could be argued it's a genuine strategic defeat. Well, the rhetoric from the Iranian government, of course, was furious, I would say, arguing that that was indeed the betrayal of the Palestinian cause and so on and so on. But from the strategic perspective, of course, it also shows that, I mean, the Iranian understanding of its defense of the territory, that no other country should be bordering on Iran, which is hostile to Iran, it's now broken, because now you've got Bahrain and now you've got United Arab Emirates, which certainly shows that those countries which were argued by the Iranians as being close to Iran at some point, well, at least neutral at times, but now are certainly perceived as anti-Iranian, and this geographically too means basically breaking the Iranian understanding of its geopolitical defense of its territory in the Middle East. I would also like to talk about what moves can be expected from the Iranian government to show that actually the diplomatic breakthrough is not that, I would say, in their minds, it's not that important, and what can Iran do indeed to counteract, to challenge this Israeli success. And I think that the events in the South Caucasus somehow could be used for that purpose. Well, I would like to draw your attention to Armenia, actually, which over the past several years, of course, they shared differences over the Israeli military, of course, supplies to Azerbaijan. But over the past couple of years, there was notable diplomatic success between the two states. But now, with the ongoing confrontation between Azerbaijan and Yerevan, once again we see some troubles between Israel and Armenia, and I believe that on that front, Iran could use this as an opportunity to somehow undermine the relations between Armenia and Israel. And as to other possibilities, we could argue that Israel would mount simply an active diplomatic campaign against Israel with its allies around the Middle East. I'm not quite sure how Iran would be trying to counteract Israeli success through, or whether it will actually counter it militarily, but at least from the Iranian media, or from what I see from the official Iranian media, I see somehow that for the moment, Iranians are much calmer than it was, a month or 2 months ago. But Iranian strategic thinking is always sort of postponing the act for counteracting further when possibilities arise. So I wouldn't say that, even though we do not have I would say hostile, that hostile as it was 2 months ago, this propaganda or statements from the Iranian government or official media. I still believe that, of course, Israel should be ready for the counteraction from the Iranian side, and I believe that that might take place not so much from those countries which are bordering on Israel, but might come from a bit far on the diplomatic level. That might actually be Armenia and some other countries with which Israel shares some differences.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you so much indeed. I have been listening to you, and frankly, I've not been given so far a consideration where Russians are in this game, because historically, Soviet Union and Russians been always been advocating for sort of the Palestinian cause, and in the context of the recent developments, having such a radar silence in Russia, it's really quite surprising. And we have yet to see what could be a Russian attitude to what's happening in the Middle East, and we'll probably see that in one way or another. So that's been a good point which you've raised. It's not also surprising that we're talking so much about Iranian alleged arch of influence. And also like your point, which is special for us to consider, whether the dwindling influence and diminishing influence of Iran in the Middle East could somehow backfire or surface in the South Caucasus, where the Iranians would be tilting, their attention. I'm not sure that they will be tilting completely from the Middle East to the South Caucasus, but where the South Caucasus could be a platform for somehow, rewarding Iranians' quest for influence in the broad region. So that's probably the issue which we have to see. And I also like your word of recalibrating, which takes me to another word which became so popular in the modern diplomacy under the connotation of transactionality. You've been more diplomatic when speaking about recalibrating and recalibration. And since I'm putting an equation between recalibration and transactionality, it's a good time for me to go to Vakhtang Charaia, Professor Charaia, because once I've mentioned this connotation of transactionality, obviously, apparently, the move which we're witnessing in the Middle East, A, relates to the security concerns, but B, it also relates to the high-tech economy and trading potentials of Israel. And I think, the Gulf states, which are breaking the impasse existing for ages and ages, are clearly reconsidering and realizing the benefits of that transactionality when moving the things from the dark side to the white side, to the daylight. And because they clearly see that the benefits of transacting with Israel as a high-tech economy, as was among the most prominent trading partner in the region, could bring their own benefits to the national economies of United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So, Vakhtang, could you please explore a bit more on the sort of, economic benefits or business benefits of the developments which we're witnessing in the Middle East? So please, Vakhtang.
Thank you, Mr. Kipiani. I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I would like to welcome Mr. Ambassador, His Excellency, and Mr. Emil Avdaliani as well. So this is a good team to discuss this issue within, and I'm glad that I have this opportunity as well. So, of course, UAE and Israel cooperation, which the world was waiting for many years has come to reality right now, and there are a lot of economic, first of all, opportunities for all, not only for the Israel and UAE, but also other countries in the Gulf region, and there could be some specific benefits which could be related to high tech, which you mentioned, of course. Israeli high tech and UAE wealth in combination could bring a new fruits for not only for the region but for the globe, and also. I would not say that South Caucasus will be related by this cooperation too much, but still there are a lot of points where South Caucasus countries can benefit or maybe even be challenged by this kind of cooperation. So first of all, let me put, since I have this wonderful opportunity to speak about Georgia as well, if Mr. Kipiani will allow me to show a small PowerPoint presentation, I would like to bring a few numbers between Israel and Georgia, how we are doing with each other, because when we are speaking about South Caucasus, Georgia is one of the I would say prominent players in the region, has a specific cooperation with Israel, and I want to show this specific cooperation how it's going on. But first of all, let me say that Georgia-Israel cooperation is still growing and in different directions, by the way, but is limited so far. I will show some numbers later on which will prove my position. So last important governmental visit between each other, between Israel and Georgia, has been back only in 2017. So 3-4 years has been passed from the last visit of Georgian Prime Minister to Israel, and since then we don't had any significant meetings between our leaders. But I hope Mr. Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Gidor will work on this direction as well, and we'll have soon high-level communication between our states. If we take trade, I would like to say a few words about trade, investment, transit, tourism, and everything we have with each other. So in terms of trade, our trade is growing. In the first 8 months of 2020, for instance, trade between Georgia and Israel has been increased by 9%. Israel is one of the rarest countries, by the way, with whom Georgia has positive trade balance. Export has increased by 51% in the same period and reached 12 million USD. Export without re-export was equal to 4.5 million. So I mean, Georgian products without re-exporting other products were equal to 4.5 million, which we sent to Israel. And import from Israel in the 8 months of 2020 decreased by 24% and made up 7.8 million. So these numbers show that the trade is really limited. So 10 million, 20 million, even for such a developing country like Georgia is really nothing special. So 10 and 20 million of trade between Georgia and Israel is almost nothing. So we have a great potential to increase this number. Our nations, our leaders should think about this, and there are a lot of different areas where we can cooperate in trade. So if we take export and import and say which products we are selling and buying between each other. So Georgia in general is selling aircraft parts. It could sound strange that Georgia is selling to Israel parts of aircraft, but that's, by the way, because of Israel company made investments in back in 2018, and Israeli company is producing these parts of aircraft in Georgia, which later on is sent back to Israel. So and other products which we are selling to Israel are alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, wine, beer, and some other stuff. While we are importing quite diversified number of products, but as I have mentioned, only a few millions of it's equal only to a few millions. So that's also a small number. By the way, if we check which type of products we can send to Israel, we can trade with Israel, there are a lot of room for different products which we sell abroad. I mean, Georgia is selling all over the world, and in Israel we have quite small presence. These products are, let's say, cattle, nuts, spices, fruits, mineral water, brandy, carbon steel rods, and many other products which we are selling all over the world, and there are quite a big possibility to sell these products to increase the amount of export of these products, or to export totally new products to Israel from Georgia. So there are quite promising opportunities. So these countries should use this opportunity. As I said, there are several prominent Israeli companies in Georgia which are based in Georgia. This one is Aerostructure Technologies Cyclone, which is producing those aircraft parts, and Archie Group, which is one of the major leader development company in Georgia. But I would say there are a lot of other areas where Israel could be presented in Georgia, and where Israel can make different types of investments. So it should be mentioned that there is no free trade between our nations, but it's on its negotiation, and the negotiations are on the final stage. So agreement is expected soon, hope so. In terms of investments, the numbers are a little bit more than in trade, but again, the numbers are limited with several millions in different cases. Let's say in 2015 it was 37 million investment done by Israelis in Georgia, but in 2016, next year, it was decreased to approximately 3 million. In 2017, it was increased to 7 million. In 2018, we don't have any Israeli investments in Georgia at all. In 2019, it was 20 million. So 3 million, 7 million, 20 million. So that's all what we have in terms of investments from Israel to Georgia. And unfortunately, Israel is not even in top 10 or even in top 15 countries which with investments to Georgia. But I believe there is much more opportunity. In terms of tourism, these countries are doing quite okay. I mean, Israeli tourists in Georgia are coming more and more. Their number is increasing since, let's say, 2015. We had only in 2015 we had 55,000 visitors from Israel to Georgia, but in 2019, after 5 years, the number was increased to 200,000 visitors from Israel to Georgia, for fourfolded number in 2019 and 2020. I mean, in 8 months, because of pandemic, you know, the numbers are not relevant to discuss, but still we see that in tourism, there is quite a great potential for Georgia, and also in terms of transit. Around 1,000 transit flights are done by Israeli air companies through Georgia to fly to different destinations, and around 30 direct flights we have between each other per week, which is not a small number. And by the way, UAE and Israel are negotiating, as far as I know, the same number of flights between each other. Right now, as we know, there are no direct flights, direct regular flights between Israel and UAE, and they are discussing, so as we said, up to 30 direct flights per week, as Israel has with Georgia. So now let me talk. This was the general overview of Georgia and Israeli cooperation. I wanted to say these numbers. And in terms of South Caucasus, how it will be affected by UAE-Israeli cooperation. So there are no to say direct links which you can find from cooperation of Israel and UAE and the impact of to South Caucasus. But still, we know that there is one important issue, which could be a matter of fact I would say in the future, maybe in 5-10 years. I don't expect it sooner, but still there is one interesting issue of oil and gas transit. As you know, today in Georgia, with Azerbaijan and Turkey, with help of Baku, Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline is providing gas and oil to European Union member state countries. And right now, we know that among other discussions and negotiations, there are discussions and negotiations among Israel and UAE of transit, first of all, gas, and later on maybe oil as well, through Israel and then through Mediterranean to European Union member countries. So this is quite complicated issue. It's not an easy issue because of many different aspects. Let's say Turkish influence in the Mediterranean because of some tensions between Greece and Turkey and new sources of gas in the Mediterranean Sea, which made quite a big dispute between Greece and Turkey. And there are, I would not go too deep into the politics, but there are some issues which are complicating this process. But still, if Israel and the UAE will decide to do this, I believe it's possible. And in this case, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan and the second pipeline through Israel could become some sort of competitors. Maybe not competitors, and they will fulfill each other to diversify EU's hydrocarbon resource dependence, might be. But at the same time, there could be some competition because of Israel and UAE and some other players in the region might be interested in weakening Turkish and Russian influence over the EU on in terms of gas and oil supply. So this is the main area where we can see some challenges which would bring maybe even new fruits and not especially problems to the South Caucasus. But in some sense, we can't predict it right now how it will how the process will go on and how it will be ended. But if the process will go as this new pipeline through Israel could become a competitor to Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, then Georgia, of course, with Baku and Turkey as well, will have some problems. But for Georgia, the problem would not be so huge, I would say, because it gets only transit compensation from the pipeline, and for Georgian economy, it's not so huge and such important from the economic point of view, but it is really important from the political and security point of view, as everyone knows. So there are some, there could be some challenges for Georgia as well. You know that European Union member states, at least some of them, are trying to decrease their dependence on hydrocarbon resources and to go to more renewable energies. And in next decade, let's say, if EU will decrease, if it will manage to decrease its dependence on hydrocarbon resources, then the competition between these new pipelines could be real, by the way. But I would not jump so far into the future, and that I just would like to mention that this is the real issue where South Caucasus and UAE-Israeli cooperation could meet each other with some opportunities and some challenges as well. So that's what I wanted to say for today. Thank you very much, and I'm ready for discussion.
Vakhtang, thank you so much indeed. So 2 quick points. Point number 1, the better Israeli economy does, better for us, that's for sure. So wish all the prosperity and well-being to the nation of Israel. And the second point about the alleged competing interests of those pipelines, etc., you pointed out correctly that we should not be in rush to jump in conclusions, but for any sort of, provocative thinking, in a good way, in a good sense of this word, of course, that's going to be an interesting subject matter to explore. Well, thank you so much indeed. So, gentlemen, with your permission, we'll take probably 10 more minutes because there are many, many issues. I did some prep work here, but wrote down various points, and some points are surfacing in the course of these discussions. Ambassador, one point which we definitely should mention in more details when we speak about what's the next, when we speak about the new diplomacy in the region. And when I'm saying what the next, we should definitely explore more on the stance of Saudi Arabia, which is a key state in the Middle East. And your honest diplomatic response, what could be the behavior of Saudi Arabia, which shows, some signals. Our audience knows that Bahrain's consent could obviously came up with the tacit approval of Saudi Arabia. That's sort of, the allegations, but I think, quite based allegations. I was also delighted to see that Saudi Arabia has opened the space for commercial air flights to Israel. That's also, quite a good point. And grudgingly enough, but they also agreed to moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the US embassy. So, Ambassador, do those moves give a clear signal that Saudi Arabia could be somewhere next in the row? And also the last point, what would be the destiny and the fate of the Saudi-led Arab Peace Initiative? While we're discussing the Palestinian cause, and let me just in very few words remind to the audience, what that initiative means. It means that Israel should withdraw to the pre-June 1961 borders. The settlement for Palestinian refugees should be provided on a fair basis. And it provides for establishing the Palestinian state with the East Jerusalem as a capital. So if Saudi Arabia would follow the path of UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, how that initiative, could be dealt with. So please your take, please give your insight. Also, please give your insight, whether we're to expect, for example, the same Sudan or Oman, So obviously, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates are not the final destination points in the process. So please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I agree with all the excellent points you've made. It's just that I think at this point in time, it's we're all in the business of speculating because first of all, being the Israeli ambassador to Tbilisi, I'm not really part of the pool of experts or diplomats or analysts or civil servants that deal directly with Israel's relations with the Arab world. I'm fed by the bureaucratic machine. I read all the internal analysis papers, the internal reporting, but I'm here in Tbilisi. It's very difficult for me to speculate on might happen next. But beyond my personal angle, it's worth reiterating that everything that's been happening in the past few months in the Middle East is largely, not exclusively, but largely a byproduct of the political situation in the US and the presidential campaign. And of course, Saudi Arabia has been hugely interested in the outcome of the presidential elections against the background of the famous or infamous Khashoggi affair that took place a couple of years ago. And the MBS, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, wants to be allowed back into the fold and to be accepted as a legitimate actor again, because Saudi Arabia and the Saudi leadership is still smarting up from the Khashoggi affair. So I think Saudi Arabia, Israel, certainly Sudan, that wants to be removed from the US list of terrorism supporting countries, and Oman are all looking to DC to see what will happen on the 3rd of November. And that might determine not only the sequence of events in the Middle East, but the identity of the players. You rightly mentioned several confidence building measures. Mm-hmm. That were offered by the Saudis. For example, they're opening up their airspace for Israeli overflights, and we completely share your assumption that the UAE and Bahrain would never have gone public with a rapprochement with Israel unless they felt that they had explicitly or implicitly the green light from Riyadh. And it's also not a secret that the Iranian problem, the Iranian nuclear project, has brought Israel and Saudi Arabia closer than ever together. And we do see eye to eye on a whole range of issues around the Middle East, ranging from the nuclear project to Yemen and others. So, however, we also have to remember that the Saudi regime is a protector of the two out of the three holiest sites in the world for the Muslim faith. And what UAE and Bahrain can do at the flourish of the pen, it's much more challenging for the Saudis to do as the protectors of the Muslim faith. So they have to tread more carefully. And again, what will happen and in what pace and in which sequence is determined is dependent not only on the calculations in Riyadh and Jerusalem, but also the calculations in Washington, Tehran, and other capitals. So I think in about a month from now, the regional and global picture will become much clearer, and then it will be much safer to voice some kind of intelligent prognosis.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you. That's been very sort of competent advice and a competent response to your sort of your modesty made you to a point that while you're in Tbilisi, sort of you are limited in your judgment, but I think it was sort of modest based the approach, but otherwise knowing your intelligence and knowing your competence, I'm not surprised getting such a rich and full responses from you. So thank you so much. But you made a good point. We spoke about Iran, we spoke about Turkey, we mentioned Russia, and definitely, when we speak about the Middle East, without going into details into this retrenchment or America Fest or switching the pivots of U.S. foreign policy from the Middle East to Asia, etc., still, the question is, what could happen as the result of the presidential elections in the United States? And with that, I have to go with, I have to address this question to Emil Avdaliani. Emil, based on your reading of U.S. the domestic politics and foreign policies, do you expect a dramatic change in that respect? And if you expect, what could be, as a hypothetically or theoretically or potentially shifting the power in the White House from the reps to Dems? Because there is no hide and seek game. What's happening in the Middle East is hugely due to the policy by the current White House administration and its President Donald Trump. So if faces change, at the White House, what should we expect in the Middle East?
Thank you very much for this question. Well, there are several points which could be made on that front. First, perhaps, is that, in my opinion, I think that even if we have dramatic change following the elections in the US, there will be a certain consistency in the US approach towards, again, I will use this word, recalibration of its policy from the Middle East towards the Indo-Pacific region. So even if we have the change of the current president, I believe that we might have sort of a more diplomatic approach to the gradual change of the U.S. policy in the Middle East. In that, I mean, we might see, of course, the active diplomatic presence of the U.S. in the Middle East, active diplomatic game, I would say, engagement. But overall, over the years and even into the next decade, I still believe that the crucial problem for the Middle East is that the US simply cannot really pay attention to so many regions at the same time with as well, I would say, as much energy as it should give to the issue of China's rise. So I believe that active, and on that front, recalibration of the U.S. policy, I wouldn't say would be damaging for the Middle East in any way. We might actually see that U.S. active engagement could actually bring some new diplomatic rapprochements between Israel on the one hand and other Arabic states. So in a way, you could see a positive trend too in this recalibration of the U.S. policy.
Thank you so much indeed. So, gentlemen, we have 7-8 minutes to go, and therefore, not to abuse your patience and not to abuse patience of the audience. Let me raise one final question, and that question is to all of you and to myself. This question probably sounds a bit bizarre, but still, I would put this in this way. What we are seeing in the Middle East, the changing landscape of politics and international politics, does that lead us to sort of reshaping the post-COVID international landscape? So those innovative formulas, innovative approaches, let me put it in this way, rephrase it. What we're witnessing, could that be some recipe for addressing problems with our frozen conflicts or anywhere in the world? So is that, of course, I would not accept, that the Middle East process, like a magic stick, which could be applied by the principle of copy paste. But what does that tell you, and how promising could that recipe be, or could those lessons be in other parts of the world, including, or in the first place, the South Caucasus? So probably 2 minutes of your responses, and then my closing remarks, and we will end up, at this point. Ambassador, please, your thoughts, and if you will, your some advices what we Georgians could learn on our side from your experience.
I'm not sure how relevant the recent events are between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain to the South Caucasus, because Georgia, at least Georgia, is in the enviable position of being on very good terms with 3 out of 4 of its immediate neighbors, and even with Russia. Georgia, until recently, enjoyed intense tourist traffic and commercial traffic. Even in the absence of official diplomatic relations. So we wish that we had Georgia's regional neighbors and regional harmony. However, going back to the first part of your comment concerning the post-COVID world and diplomacy, I think what we're seeing is 2 clashing trajectories right now around the world. On the one hand, in the global village, in the age of the global village, where what started off in a small livestock market in Wuhan brought the entire planet on its knees. Surely, many of us realize that the only way to move forward, both in the short term to get over COVID and in the long term, is by joining hands and injecting more contents and resources into the multilateral world and multilateral organizations, be it the UN, WHO, World Health Organizations, of course, the World Trade Organizations, the European Union, because only concerted action could hope to provide an effective solution to challenges that are not unique to any one country, but to the international community at large. So this has been the mantra, and many heads of state still subscribe to this mantra. On the other hand, we see a different trajectory of withdrawal from multilateral organizations and cooperation. Of course, the leading actor in that respect is the Trump administration. But not just. We've seen the Boris Johnson administration in the UK, the Brexit, of course. We've seen governments in Hungary, in Poland, veering further and further away from the EU credo, so to speak. So the competing trends of isolationism and multilateralism are going to clash head to head in the very near future. And it should be interesting to see how that would affect the diplomatic tools that all of us have in our arsenal.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. And Emil, 2 minutes to you, please, and then to Vakhtang. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much again. Well, I think, well, there are some parallels which could be drawn, of course. But I also believe that the possibility which was given to the US to actually to make this breakthrough, diplomatic breakthrough, of course, was based on the regional geopolitics, on these difficult relations between Bahrain and UAE on the one hand and Iran on the other, and application of this method, or this possibility to our region, of course, is very difficult, although we really want this to happen. But I believe that what gave the US this possibility, of course, was the non-presence of other big players in this diplomatic game between Israel and Arab states. And in the South Caucasus, unfortunately, we have this limit posed by Russian presence in here, and of course those limited relations which US, for example, has between Armenia, well, with Armenia, and in a way with Azerbaijan. As to Georgia, of course, unfortunately for us, the US support is decisive in many ways, but since we've got this trouble with Russia, which is very different from what took place in the Middle East, I'm a bit skeptical about the chances for our own peace agreement, and I would say diplomatic solution to the problem. But at least one thing is for sure, that the US simply shows to all the countries in the region, including those in the South Caucasus, that it's still primary actor, not only in the military and economic fronts, but also in the diplomatic area.
Thank you. Vakhtang, your closing remarks, please. Vakhtang, please.
Oh, microphone.
Turn on audio, please. Yeah.
Okay, so again. So I'm optimistic, and I believe if UAE and Israeli cooperation was possible, so then Georgia could also be successful in his solving its own problems. So I believe sooner or later Georgia will be an important player in the region, because from the economic point of view, many things in the world are changing. The global games are changing, and the economic, from the economic point of view, the trends are also changing. And in this game, if Georgia will have enough support, enough international support from its strategic partners, I believe Georgia could become a new, could go to a new level and be maybe in the beginning not as much important player as Israel in the region, but somehow I believe one day Georgia will become such a great player in the region at least. And therefore, I think as more successful cases we will have over the world, better for us. The stronger partners we will have, the better for us. And of course, I congratulate UAE and Israel with their success, and I hope success will come to Georgia as well.
Thank you, Vakhtang. Thank you so much indeed. So my final points and my takes from observing what's happening in the Middle East and in relation to Israel are that there is no perpetual gridlock, and eventually every stalemate could potentially be broken down. That's very important for us Georgians to remember. So when we speak about similarities and parallels, that's an important lesson for us. That being said, it's also important for our politicians, diplomats, and political elites to remember that for addressing the existing problems in an innovative way and in a resolute manner, there should be no path dependence. And when we're speaking about the path dependence, we clearly realize what that means. That direct talks and direct contacts, always matter. And Israel case, clearly shows how much important those are. Israel example also shows us that innovative approach and leadership matters. And that is also very important, because the path which the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took, on this way, and he has been very critically, severely criticized, and many challenges clearly started producing its own benefits and its own fruits. So those are the lessons, which we are to remember when we speak about our own region, when we speak our own challenges and our own politics. And it's also very important to remember for us as for a small nation, when we speak about the US, how important it is to have the bipartisan support. So that is very important. So for us, for Georgians, not putting the bets either on the rep side or on the dam side, it's very important. So we feel that support by the United States. We appreciate that support, and we should continue the same vein and the same spirit. So that is very important. And final point, I should definitely thank all the participants of this, I think, the interesting conversation. But I should necessarily thank my good friend, and not just my good friend, but a good friend of this nation, Gidor. Ambassador, thank you so much indeed. I'm always saying, there are two types of ambassadors in Georgia. One type is just ambassadors who are doing an excellent job because they're supposed to do it because of their ambassadorial capacity. But the second type, on top of the good ambassadorial capacity, just nice and very good personalities. And you, Gidor, comprise, those two qualities. And thank you so much indeed, because you're not just an ambassador of Israel to Georgia, but I think you are an ambassador of Georgians to Israeli culture, Israeli history, and Israel. So I wish you all the very best, Ren. And also the final point, since you mentioned, then we have to see in 1 month or so what will be happening with the Abraham's Accord, which hopefully will become a type of next Camp David. So probably in 2 or 3 months, and just prejudging, the developments, we'll get together again, and we'll again, go into discussions, what we will have at that point in time. So thank you, gentlemen. very much, and have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.